Emily sat in the back seat, trusting her father, Mark, to keep her safe. But as the sun climbed higher, Mark's obsession with something far darker than his daughter's safety would turn a normal morning into a nightmare no one could have imagined. The morning began like any other in the quiet suburban neighborhood. Sunlight spilled over neatly trimmed lawns and quiet streets, the kind of calm that made people believe the day would pass without incident. Inside one small house, a father moved through his morning routine with a mechanical rhythm. Breakfast was prepared, backpacks checked, and shoes tied. On the surface, everything looked normal, ordinary, and harmless. His young daughter, bright-eyed and trusting, followed along, unaware of the shadows gathering behind the familiar shapes of the home and car. She laughed softly as she slipped into her little jacket, chatting quietly with herself, imagining adventures and stories in a world where danger was something that happened to other people. The father led her to the car, unlocking the doors and opening the trunk to place the small backpack inside. His hands were steady, but his mind was somewhere else. The day he promised to her, a simple errand or perhaps a short trip, was not what it seemed. Every movement was practiced, almost robotic. Yet beneath the routine, there was a tension that neither the girl nor the quiet neighborhood could detect. The world outside carried on as usual. Neighbors watered their lawns, cars passed slowly along the street, and birds sang in the trees. Nothing hinted at the horror about to unfold inside that small vehicle. As the daughter climbed into her seat, she did so with a sense of security that no one could have anticipated would soon be shattered. Her small fingers clutched the seatbelt, her eyes bright with innocence, unaware of the danger waiting in the sweltering metal cage that would become her prison. Her father fastened the seatbelt, checked the mirrors, and settled behind the wheel. In his mind, the errands of the day were secondary to something else entirely. His focus shifted to the glowing screen in his hand, a private world that consumed his attention completely. The plans he had made, the choices he had already begun to follow, had nothing to do with his child's safety, nothing to do with the ordinary concerns of a parent entrusted with life and care. The air in the car began to warm as the sun climbed higher, though neither of them seemed to notice. Outside, the morning continued, the ordinary rhythms of the neighborhood continuing uninterrupted. People waved at passing neighbors, mail carriers delivered letters, and children played on the sidewalks, unaware that tragedy was already unfolding just yards away. Inside the car, the little girl shifted slightly, adjusting herself, but her father was lost in the glow of a screen, scrolling, searching, following impulses that would leave her utterly vulnerable. Minutes passed, and then more minutes, though to him, time was irrelevant, meaningless in the face of what he sought. The first signs of discomfort were subtle, a frown, a small whimper, but they went unnoticed, dismissed in the preoccupation of his own desires. The car's interior became heavier, warmer, a cage tightening around the child, though she could not yet understand the danger. Every heartbeat, every breath she took brought her closer to peril. Outside, the world carried on, serene and unsuspecting. Inside, the choices of a single adult set in motion a chain of events that no one could have predicted, a quiet catastrophe hidden behind the ordinary veil of a normal morning. The stage was set, the hour growing late, and the first act of the tragedy was quietly, inexorably unfolding. The heat inside the car grew with every passing minute, rising like a silent predator, invisible yet deadly. The small girl shifted in her seat, her tiny body pressing against the hot fabric, her skin damp with sweat. She tried to move, to find comfort, but the confines of the car offered no relief. The metal exterior radiated the sun's relentless warmth, and the interior air became thick and heavy, clinging to her like a suffocating blanket. Her breaths came shallow and fast, her small chest rising and falling with increasing effort. She did not yet understand the danger she was in. The concept of being trapped and alone was beyond her grasp. All she knew was that she felt unwell, that the world around her felt too tight. too hot, too unfamiliar. Outside, the street remained calm and ordinary. A dog barked in a yard down the block, a lawnmower hummed faintly in the distance, and neighbors moved about their mornings, unaware of the suffering trapped just feet away. Inside the car, time stretched, each second heavier than the last. The father, sitting behind the wheel, barely noticed the rise in temperature or the changes in his daughter's breathing. His attention was consumed by a device in his hand, a world of images and distractions that pulled him further away from reality. His fingers scrolled, searching, clicking, absorbed in something far removed from the life sitting mere inches from him. The sound of the girl's discomfort barely registered. The girl's small hands pressed against the seat, pressing for stability, for relief, for some sense of safety. Her eyes, wide and glassy, flicked toward her father in fleeting hope, but he did not meet her gaze. Each movement she made seemed to go unnoticed, her muffled sighs swallowed by the drone of the device in his hands. The interior of the car became a prison, the walls closing in invisibly with the rising heat. Her skin burned against the seatbelt, and her hair clung to her forehead as sweat streamed down. Time moved with a torturous slowness, each minute a reminder of how quickly life could change when trust was betrayed. As the hours passed, the girl's energy waned. She grew weaker, her body responding to the extreme conditions with fatigue and confusion. The once lively and bright child became still, curling in on herself in a futile attempt to find comfort. The father remained lost in his obsession, unaware or unwilling to recognize the escalating danger. The world inside the car became a separate reality, one of rising temperatures, diminishing air, and a small body struggling to survive. Outside, the sun climbed higher, indifferent to the tragedy unfolding below it. Birds continued to sing, neighbors continued their routines, and the street remained calm and unsuspecting. In those hours, a life was quietly slipping away. The girl's breaths grew shorter, her movements slower, her struggle less forceful. Every second she remained inside the car was another moment closer to irreversible harm. The father's choices, once small distractions, had transformed into lethal neglect. Time and temperature became adversaries, relentless and unforgiving. Each passing minute was a step further into tragedy, a chain of events fueled by obsession and inattention. The car, meant to be a vessel of safety and mobility, had become a coffin. Outside, the world remained untouched by the horror inside, but within the small, sweltering space, life hung by a fragile thread, unprotected and vulnerable. The first signs of alarm came from the neighbors. At first, it was subtle, a lingering glance at the car parked under the relentless sun, a question forming silently in the back of their minds. The vehicle had been stationary for far too long. Children playing nearby slowed their games and watched, sensing that something was wrong, though they could not understand what. The world outside continued as if nothing were happening, oblivious to the nightmare taking shape inside that small, sweltering vehicle. The father remained absorbed, unaware of the growing concern around him, or perhaps ignoring it entirely. The heat inside the car had reached unbearable levels. The child's body, weakened and frail, could no longer respond with the energy it once had. Her small hands fell limp to her sides, her breathing shallow and uneven, each inhale a labor, each exhale a struggle. The once vibrant spark of life dimmed quietly, unnoticed by the person who should have been her protector. Outside, the sun beat down, relentless and indifferent, turning the interior of the car into a furnace. The windows trapped the heat, amplifying it, while the small body inside succumbed to the rising temperature. Every second brought her closer to collapse, her life slipping away in a haze of heat and exhaustion. By the time the neighbors decided to act, the situation had escalated beyond comprehension. Someone called the authorities, their voice trembling, explaining that a child might be trapped in a hot vehicle. The air was tense with urgency, neighbors gathering in clusters, their eyes fixed on the car. When emergency responders arrived, the horror was undeniable. The doors were opened, and the oppressive heat poured out like a physical wave. The little girl was lifeless, her body limp and unresponsive. Paramedics worked swiftly, but the damage had been done. The child had been left to the unyielding heat for far too long, and there was nothing they could do to bring her back. The father's response stunned everyone. Calmly, without hesitation or apparent guilt, he admitted that he had known the child was inside the car and had made a choice to let the situation continue. His words echoed through the neighborhood, disbelief and anger rippling outward. Investigators began their work immediately, reconstructing the timeline, piecing together every moment, every action, and inaction that had led to the tragedy. Devices were examined, search histories scrutinized, revealing the obsessive distractions that had stolen his attention and, ultimately, his daughter's life. Every click, every pause, every indulgence painted a clearer picture of neglect and willful disregard. The realization that this was not an accident hit the community hard. People struggled to comprehend how a father could allow such suffering, how a life so small and fragile could be endangered by something so avoidable. The investigation exposed a chilling sequence of choices, each one compounding the last, until the result was irreversible. The ordinary morning, the familiar streets, the trusting child, all of it was shattered by a moment of selfish obsession. The world outside had continued. Unaware, while inside the car, a life had ended, leaving a void that could never be filled. The community began to reckon with the magnitude of the horror, the betrayal of trust, and the devastating consequences of one parent's neglect. The investigation into the father's life revealed a side of him few had imagined. Friends and family struggled to reconcile the man they knew with the one capable of allowing such a tragedy. Behind closed doors, his habits and routines painted a troubling picture. There were patterns of secrecy, moments of detachment, and obsessions that had gradually consumed his attention. The discovery of hidden devices, private search histories, and secret online activity suggested a mind increasingly removed from reality, a man who prioritized his desires over the safety of his own child. Each revelation deepened the community's horror, challenging the idea that evil could lurk behind an ordinary facade. Psychologists brought insight into the father's behavior, explaining how compulsions and addiction can distort judgment and moral awareness. They described the dangerous combination of obsession, detachment, and entitlement, showing how these forces can override instincts that should protect a child. Ordinary people, they noted, can sometimes cross the line when impulses are left unchecked, when desire eclipses responsibility. Experts emphasized that while such cases are extreme, they reveal vulnerabilities in human behavior and the devastating consequences when care and attention are abandoned. The community, once trusting and familiar, began to fracture under the weight of the revelations. Parents questioned their own routines, replaying moments when distractions could have endangered their own children. Neighbors spoke quietly among themselves, sharing disbelief and grief. How could someone so close, someone who seemed normal, allow such harm? Every story about the father's earlier life, every memory once seen as mundane, was now examined for warning signs that had been missed. The ordinary rhythms of life were forever altered, replaced with suspicion, sorrow, and the lingering question of how much attention is enough to keep loved ones safe. The father's relationships were also revealed to be marked by detachment and secrecy. Friends described a man who often seemed preoccupied, who withdrew into private worlds and refused to share thoughts or feelings. Small acts of neglect, once overlooked, now appeared as indicators of a deeper, more dangerous pattern. His focus on digital indulgences, rather than on his family, had been escalating for months. A steady erosion of responsibility that ultimately culminated in catastrophe. Each detail, uncovered piece by piece, left a trail of moral and emotional devastation that rippled through the neighborhood and beyond. As the investigation continued, the story of the tragedy became a lens through which broader societal issues were examined. Experts and journalists highlighted the dangers of digital obsession, the fragility of trust in relationships, and the consequences of neglect that is sometimes subtle, sometimes deliberate. The father's actions were dissected, analyzed, and condemned, serving as both a warning and a study in human failure. The community grappled with the enormity of what had happened, struggling to understand how a life could be lost not to an accident, but to the choices of someone who should have been a guardian. The child's death became a mirror reflecting the dangers of distraction, the risks hidden in everyday routines, and the horrifying reality of what can occur when care is replaced by obsession. The courtroom was filled with a heavy silence, a tension that pressed down on everyone present. The evidence was overwhelming. Investigators laid out a detailed timeline, showing exactly how long the child had been trapped, how the father had been distracted, and the series of choices that led to her death. Every search, every click, every moment of inattention was presented as proof of deliberate neglect. The father's own admissions left no room for doubt. The community watched in disbelief, struggling to comprehend the calmness with which he had recounted the events, the lack of remorse, and the acceptance of responsibility only in words, not in action. Families across the courtroom and beyond the city felt the impact of the story. Parents questioned their own routines, replaying moments when distraction had crept into their lives, realizing how easily tragedy could strike. The child's death became more than a local horror. It became a cautionary tale, a reminder that even brief lapses in attention can have irreversible consequences. The weight of grief was shared by neighbors, friends, and strangers alike, each person confronting the fragility of life and the terrifying power of negligence. The father was sentenced, the verdict marking a definitive acknowledgement of the crime. Justice, in its legal sense, was served, but the emotional devastation remained. For the community, the courtroom proceedings were not just about punishment. They were about understanding how an ordinary person could make choices that led to such extraordinary tragedy. The judge's words echoed beyond the walls of the court, emphasizing accountability, the responsibilities inherent in parenthood, and the consequences of prioritizing desire over life. The sentence, while necessary, could never bring back the child or erase the pain inflicted on those left behind. In the weeks and months following the verdict, the neighborhood began to confront the aftermath. Vigils were held, memorials were erected, and conversations about parental responsibility and digital obsession became part of local discourse. People examined the small moments in daily life that could carry immense weight, reflecting on how easily attention can drift and how catastrophic the results can be when it does. The tragedy prompted changes in routines, heightened awareness of children's safety, and a renewed sense of vigilance in households throughout the community. The child's memory became a symbol, a reminder that life is precious and fragile, and that neglect, even momentary, can have permanent consequences. The story spread beyond the local area, reaching national audiences who grappled with the shocking reality of preventable death. Parents, caregivers, and even strangers were forced to confront uncomfortable truths about responsibility, distraction, and the consequences of unchecked impulses. The tragedy left an indelible mark, not only on the family and the community, but on the broader awareness of how easily ordinary lives can be upended by a single, avoidable choice. It was a story of grief, of horror, and of caution, a stark reminder that vigilance, care, and attention are never optional, and that the cost of neglect can be more devastating than anyone could imagine.